Welcome to our August edition of Transform, Rinse, and Repeat. My name is Francisco Barroso. I'm a principal at Deloitte and leader of our AI and data engineering business in the US. Over the course of my 24 years with the firm, I've led many transformations for many clients, but primarily in the healthcare space. So I'm very excited to moderate today's discussion and take a look at how exponential technologies are transforming our healthcare system. I'm joined today by two very accomplished leaders. And so I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, Rajeev Ronanki. Rajeev is a long-term friend of mine and somebody I've worked with for many years. Rajeev is a best-selling author of AI and You. He's a senior vice president of Elevance Health, formerly known as Anthem, and president of Carolon Digital Platforms. Also with us, we have another best-selling author, Rich Nanda. Rich is the author of The Transformation Myth and leads Deloitte's strategy and analytics business in the US. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Rajeev. So that Rajeev, you can share with us a little bit more of your career. And then from there, I'll pass the mic to Rich and we'll get on with our dialogue.
All right. Well, thanks, Fran, for having me. And always great to be in the company of former Deloitte colleagues. And kudos to all the success that the firm has had, and great to see how you guys are building on exponential technologies and kind of bringing that to life with clients and industries. So I spent a few years at Deloitte, as a partner, working very closely with Rich and Fran and others, primarily at the intersection of technology and healthcare, and then just happened to get an opportunity to lead the digital transformation at Elevance, and as Fran said, formerly known as Anthem. It was just a great opportunity to come in and drive impact and scale of the company, that serves nearly 45 million lives and whose mission it is to help improve the health of humanity. And our CEO, Gail, firmly believes that, to do that, we really have to leverage our data assets, really apply technology at scale, leverage things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to really change every part of our business, whether it's the consumer experience or whether it's our core operations, using data and insights and AI to drive better health equity. All those things, we firmly believe, our board and management team, a CEO, everyone believes that, the path to doing that is through these capabilities. So that's kind of what I'm leading. It's an incredibly impactful opportunity and privilege to be sort of playing that role at Elevance.
Very exciting. Rich, on to you.
All right. Thanks, Francisco and Rajeev. Thanks for being here with us. So I'm Rich Nanda, 21 years here at Deloitte. And, in my day job, I serve consumer products clients. In a very similar vein to what Rajeev described is, our clients are seeing the opportunity for growth and enterprise resilience coming increasingly through advanced technologies and digital transformations. And so I get to do that work with my clients. And I also lead our strategy and analytics business, which we very intentionally put those two capabilities together because we do see that corporate competitiveness and growth really does get born from a more insights and AI-led organization. So it's an incredibly fun time to lead our team in strategy and analytics. And it's incredibly fun and a privilege to get the chance to serve clients like Rajeev on their transformation journeys.
Excellent. Well, as we get started, I want to remind our audience that this is an interactive discussion. And so we look forward to engaging the panel with you. And so please use the chat live function to enter your questions, and I'll be checking that periodically, and from there, posing the questions to our panelists. So Rajeev, let's get started. In your book, you do a really nice job of framing, I'm going to call it the overarching issues that have been putting a stress on all of us as consumers of the healthcare system, which is a very complex system in this country. And so I would love for you to begin frame some of the, again, long-standing issues that have been putting a stress on how we service, on the cost of the system, just to frame the audience or to orient the audience around some of these issues, especially for those that are not familiar with healthcare.
Yeah. I think some describe the healthcare system or in our country as being a sick care system. So if you have an issue, whether it's something that's as complex as cancer, or perhaps as simple as fixing a broken bone, the system works relatively well. You can go find a good quality set of hospitals or doctors, and they take care of it. The issue that we have is everything else around it. So once that visit happens, the billing, the claims, the coordination of care is a huge administrative waste that no one really understands. And payers and health systems spends billions of dollars on administrative things around the delivery of care, which I think could be largely avoided through the smart use of technology, AI, and things like that. And then if you flip it from a consumer perspective, simple things like transferring medical records from one doctor to the other, one system to the other, is incredibly cumbersome. It's actually, in most cases, the hospitals require you to fax something into them, or take a CD, DVD, and find a place to even find a computer that would actually read that. So, and the technology exists to make and solve all those problems, and make the consumer experience of healthcare simpler. The issue we're trying to solve is that there's so many different disparate experiences. So imagine if if Amazon or a marketplace like that didn't exist and you were shopping, you'd have to go to 15, 16 different places in order to assemble your shopping list and get delivery and track 15, 16 different things. Healthcare is a little bit like that, which is that the individual experience of going to a great hospital like a Mayo or a Cleveland Clinic might be great, but none of it is connected. And from a consumer perspective, it's incredibly hard to navigate the system, find the basic information, connect the dots, and get the experiences that we all are used to in every other part of our life. And then the other thing is, there's an incredible amount of data and insights around predicting what might happen in a person's future healthcare journey, and take steps to proactively and preemptively address it so people can stay healthy. Well, why aren't we doing it? Well, it turns out that there aren't really many incentives to do that, right? So one of the perhaps a little known facts in healthcare is that the churn rate, for any insurance company tends to be around 18 to 24 months for an average commercial fully insured member. Mm-hmm. And preventative programs often have a payback period of 5 to 6 years. So if you're preventing someone from having diabetes or a chronic condition, it's a long investment cycle, and the return's there, but the return may not accrue to your own company. So how do you align incentives to make some of those make the case for making those decisions happen? So these are some challenges. I think there are solutions, but definitely a long way to go in terms of bringing all that to life at scale.
Very good. I mean, Rajeev, as I think of healthcare, it's also a very regulated industry, right? So as we think of the introduction of these exponential technologies, AI, ML, blockchain, clearly a huge opportunity for disruption. We also need to be very careful about how we go about introducing them, given privacy, given security. Mm-hmm. And so help us understand, as you think of, exponential technologies, AI, blockchain, et cetera, the power that they have to begin to transform the industry. How do you go about architecting that journey? How do you just talked about Elevance and the 45 million lives that you insure. So as the leader of this massive organization, how do you go about putting that flywheel in motion and architecting the journey to change?
I think you use the word there, Fran. I think that's really the solution, which is to create the flywheel effect, right? Which is, if we engage consumers and create a delightful experience, then they're more likely to return and use the digital assets to start their care journey. And as with any digital transformation, once a physical asset gets digitized and virtualized, then you can really begin to integrate that differently and begin to scale it, right? At first, the change will be small and deceptively sort of under the radar, if you will. But as with any exponential technology, as the doubling effect of that technology sort of starts to kick in at scale, then the disruption starts to be felt and sort of starts to create that impact at scale. So our view is just that, which is let's fix the consumer experience. Let's use all the technology capabilities, all the AI, all the other exponential technologies to really create a compellingly simple healthcare experience for everyone. And then, make that digital first, so that as with any other experience in life where you start with search or an app or a portal, let's start our healthcare journey there. Not that that's the place that it should end necessarily, but it's a place to start. Finding care, looking for options, looking for virtual care, consulting with a doc 24/7. Any of those things are available today. So we can start there, and then connect the bricks and mortar infrastructure that's of course needed, right? So hospital systems, providers, clinics, home health, other things that are needed in the system, and then connect supply and demand more effectively. So if you think about consumers' health needs as being the demand side, and the providers of care, whether they're virtual or digital or at, in a hospital system or a clinic or a home, as being the supply. Then if we curate that supply and connect that to the demand, then you've got the beginnings of a flywheel effect, right? Where we can predict demand, personalize the experience, and then connect them to the appropriate supply. And in so doing, address, another thing that you mentioned, which is affordability. A lot of our costs in our healthcare system happen to stem from the fact that, let's say, a consumer doesn't have a primary care physician and has an issue that needs to be dealt with. Most likely, they'll end up in an urgent care or an ER, where the cost of that care is significantly more expensive than perhaps it would be if you went and saw a primary care physician. So if we're able to anticipate needs like that and serve up different care options to consumers, then they're like, yeah, well, I would rather do something from the convenience of my phone or my home than going and waiting in the ER or urgent care. And then they'll be like, all right, next time I'll be more inclined to use it. Well, the more people that use it, the more data we collect, and the more data we collect, we get more insights, and with more insights, we can make the experiences all the more personalized, right? And then we can see what works and what doesn't, and then to the title of this show, rinse and repeat that process. And so that's kind of how we think about it.
Very good, very good. Rich, you have studied actually let's call it the architecture of many of these disruptions across many industries. So I would love to hear from you about some of the common attributes, that we have seen organizations embrace as they embrace disruption to leap forward.
Yeah. So I think maybe two kind of reactions to that question, and I'll try and relate it to some of the things Rajeev was talking about. But one is, regardless of the industry sector, most companies are still adapting to the digital economy and society we're in, because the innovation, whether it's technological or the application of that technology, is relentless. So, Rajeev was describing the healthcare system and value chain, that maybe is still in the relatively early innings of digitizing and adapting to what patients and the system needs. That's not too different than where some other business to business industries might be, or the institutional side of financial services. You could argue the consumer facing industries are, a little bit farther along in their journeys on those digital transformations. But I can tell you, many of the clients I serve, would say they're still in the early innings of the journey themselves, and pushing themselves to keep up. And then even the digitally native businesses, the ones that were born in this economy and their products and services are completely digital, they're still adapting as well. And then when you think about the business opportunities, Rajeev started with customer churn. Most of the subscription entertainment companies right now are dealing with a big customer churn problem. So, the best technology in the world still doesn't solve a high-end customer experience and having the right products. And so the journey's never over, right? Once you mature yourself around the technology, then you're continually tuning the business, to grow and compete with other competitors, that are using the same tools. So you could keep playing that forward with the supply and demand, aspects that Rajeev was speaking about. Regardless of whether you're a traditional company that's early in their digital transformation or you're a digitally native company, they're all still working to generate more demand and then most optimally serve that demand. And so, that's why the rinse repeat here is so important, is the journey's never over, regardless of how digitally savvy or mature you think you are.
Very good. So Rajeev, if you get started and you have a vision, you're driving the organization to become an AI first organization, and then guess what? An unprecedented pandemic hits us, and probably all of your plans, need to be pivot. And so we'd love to have you share with us, how you embrace, this unprecedented time and all of the stress that put on a healthcare system, probably again, unprecedented stress, to assert your agenda and take advantage of that crisis in order to, across the continuum of the value chain, right, from member engagement to the quality of care, take advantage of the capabilities that you were beginning to employ and accelerate, the adoption and the opportunity for transformation.
Yeah, Fran, I think I was reading somewhere that the chief digital officer of a company during the pandemic was COVID-19. I think in some ways it served to accelerate the transformation agenda, because one, as you said, the stress it put on our healthcare system meant that only the sickest people could be served in the traditional settings, and everyone else, we had to find a different way of serving their healthcare needs. So we saw a tremendous adoption of virtual and digital care options, and in most cases that's a doctor on Zoom, connecting with a patient and sort of taking care of their healthcare needs. But the interesting thing that happened out of that was, well, now when you're doing something virtually, then you can start to collect the data about that visit, right? You can record the visit. You can generate a claim off of that video, sort of recording, if you will. You can upload the electronic medical record with the same information without having the doctor swiveling and going back and forth to the EMR, the electronic medical record, and seeing the patient and being distracted in the process. So to actually, as we surveyed both physicians as well as patients during this process, we found that there was a great degree of satisfaction from both parties. It created physicians more options and flexibility in when they could see their patients, and obviously patients would get access to care, obviously not appropriate in all cases, but where it was appropriate, they could do it from the convenience of their home, their phones, whatever other channels that they would prefer to use. But in the process, it gave us the ability to collect the insights, collect the data, figure out how to make the experience better, amplify the sort of the virtual visit with more data, so that both the consumer and the provider experience could be enhanced. And we had nearly 20 million virtual visits in 2021, and we're on pace to do something similar this year. So which means that virtual care, which was sort of slowly making its way into consumer adoption and provider adoption, suddenly it was adopted at scale, and we had to kind of scramble and accelerate sort of the capability development to make sure that we had a scaled offering. So we responded to that, and we quickly kind of made that available to all of our stakeholders. Second, like every other company, we had to scramble and make our workforce virtual overnight, and connect the dots and sort of make collaboration happen in new ways, right? And which required that every one of our associates, nearly 100,000 associates across the globe, had to think about like a virtual first way of engaging with their fellow associates to get work done. And that, again, was an accelerant in the digital transformation of the company. And then lastly, we had to get much more efficient and much faster than we had planned, because for various reasons, obviously, there was different patterns of claims. There was lag in claims. We needed to scramble and get our provider systems the help that they needed, to essentially weather the storm during the pandemic. All of which was a massive, data problem. Sort of putting together different types of data, predicting where the demand was going to be and where the next surge was going to be, and anticipate that and make it happen. But what we were able to demonstrate is that digital technologies can work at scale, can be very agile and very flexible in terms of adapting to changing market, changing economic, changing health circumstances, and most importantly, demonstrated that you can adapt it, to create new business models. And so that then those lessons then serve to sort of really, in the microcosm of the pandemic, show how digital transformation can really elevate the performance of a company and make it much more resilient to stresses like this in the future. And so, if anything, I'd say it's helped to accelerate our transformation and reinforce the belief that these are the right bets to make for our company. And I'm optimistic that largely across the healthcare system that these lessons could be used to build a better future for the country.
I love it. I want to pick on a couple of things that you brought up, and I'm going to point the question to you, Rich. Rajeev talked about using disruption as an opportunity to get into new business models. In your book, you talk about the growth mindset. So what are some of the key takeaways, as you look across industries, how change and disruption has been embraced to drive, that growth mindset, and where is that, taking, some of the largest companies, that are, again, embracing that change to leap forward and to disrupt at scale?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, and we wrote about this in the book, that organizations and leaders that bring a growth mindset, tend to outperform those that have a fixed mindset. And so growth mindsets, they tend to, be more willing to experiment, to understand, how to scope and take on calculated risks, and then they promote that within, the organization and within the teams. And so you can see in a time like in the pandemic, when there was this very acute disruption and it was all hands on deck, the companies with that growth mindset, they just had the muscles, the ability to adapt and do things very boldly and differently, to respond quickly. And they were able to scale up new capabilities more so than companies that tend to have the fixed mindset, and they were learning new things on the fly and, having to play catch up. And so really, and it comes down to individual leaders, right? Really kind of internalizing, exhibiting, and practicing the growth mindset, and then it becomes contagious within teams and across the organization. And I think the next test is coming, right? So if the pandemic was this very sudden and dramatic and acute disruption that we all had to live through, first and foremost as a health and human crisis, but also as a business crisis, the reemergence into the next normal, which is going to take lots of time. It is this virtual plus physical worlds coming together in a way that people, consumers, patients really want it. And we've long talked about omni-channel being the kind of the combination of those two worlds, but that long away ambition of a perfect omni-channel experience, like the urgency to get there and deliver on it is now, because people have experienced virtual and how effective it can be, and they're craving some of the physical, and they want the best of both. And whether that's how we work, how we entertain ourselves, or how we consume our healthcare, the bar is very high. And I think, again, it's going to be a time where great innovation will reward companies who can get there first.
I'm gonna take the first question from our audience today. Rajeev, as we think of the role of the private sector alongside government, what are your thoughts on how together we can work to scale the use of exponential technologies, ultimately to get to the outcomes that you are alluding to, right? Lowering costs, expanding access, improving the quality of care. Very curious about that, that journey, given, again, that this is a very regulated industry.
Yeah, you're absolutely, it's a great question, Fran. I think the government has to play a key role in creating a tailwind for the adoption of these technologies, right? And it could be as simple as, for example, there's a rule from CMS that basically says that for any Medicare patient, before you can use a virtual visit, you have to have an in-person visit. Well, it sounds like, okay, there must be some rationale for that. But what if someone just wanted to have a virtual visit and you just can't? And so therefore, you're creating a barrier to adoption of what would be, I think, something that's convenient for the consumer, inadvertently, because you've got some standard of care, sort of policy that someone created, perhaps without thinking about the implication of it. Another example is all the physicians have to be credentialed by each state. So then, if you were to practice medicine in let's say in California, you have to be credentialed in California, and you can't really practice medicine virtually across state lines. So a California doctor cannot see someone in Nevada virtually. And until the pandemic, where they relaxed those rules, and you can actually, make those things happen. So then, if you say, well, how do you reduce costs? Then you have to sort of balance supply and demand in order to ultimately reduce costs, right? And then if you have to create supply in each state and comply with each state's regulatory framework, then you're artificially increasing costs. And whereas the government's stated goal is to lower costs and improve access, right? So in some cases, policies like this tend to be counterproductive to the adoption of technologies. So we spend quite a bit of time with with policymakers at all levels, at state, local, federal levels, to educate them on the implications of these policies. And today the political discourse is what it is, but there's really some thoughtful lawmakers out there that want to understand technologies better, the implications of those technologies better, and really work with us to say, well, how should we set it up? And so it's a really good partnership between private and policymakers to make change happen. And there's very thoughtful lawmakers out there that can speak very eloquently about topics like blockchain, about artificial intelligence, the implications of those technologies to privacy and security and convenience and access, and they're creating good policies. But like with anything in the government, it takes time to kind of go through the legislative process and the policy-making process to make those things happen. The way that they can help is to think about how does government sort of enable private sector to innovate on these technologies safely and responsibly, and making that impact at scale happen, which if left without obviously a regulatory framework, then it'll be a free-for-all, which obviously we don't want to have happen. It's got to be a good balance. And I think we're starting to sort of get there in terms of that balance. It's not quite there yet, but I'm optimistic based on sort of the discussions that we've had in the last couple of years that we can make happen.
So Rich, continuing.
Hey, Francisco, just real quick on this, the government interaction. I mean, I think the other opportunity is the government is a significant consumer of emerging technology, right? And so whether it's defense and justice or logistics, infrastructure, education, like there's a big opportunity to apply emerging technology in innovative ways to those government services that we expect, and it's happening. And so there's some cause for optimism, I think, in the scale and the innovation power of federal, state, and local governments across the world. And we should all be optimistic and push those institutions to be more innovative, because as the innovation happens in the public sector, there's a lot of positive bleed over into the policies, and there's a lot of positive bleed over into how those technologies can then be deployed in similar ways in the private sector. So, I think we should expect a lot from our, from the governments around us to be partners in innovation.
Very good. So Rajeev, we just talked about the role of government, which is obviously, foundational to, this whole system. Let's look at ecosystems. Obviously, the set of stakeholders that make our healthcare system function, is very diverse, right? So we talked about insurance companies, providers, pharmacy, pharma, etc. Part of this ecosystem is obviously also, key, technology companies. Talk about, AWS, GCP, as we think of data sharing, and all the advances that are taking place. Help us understand how you harness and embrace ecosystems as a way to enable capabilities, build resiliency within the organization, increase speed, to value. We love some of your insights and lessons learned on that front?
Yeah, Fran, I think we think of ourselves as a digital platform for health. That's kind of one of our core strategic pillars. And as any platform, you would expect it to be sort of one that connects supply and demand effectively, like as I was saying earlier. But then the platform needs to sort of run on a set of compute capabilities, right? Hyperscalers and all the rest of it. And that's where it's been for us at Elevance anyway, it's been a really good partnership with all the sort of the leading partners, Amazon, Google, and we leverage multiple sort of let's just say compute services to really enable us to kind of scale our platform and kind of bring in some of the sort of the tech philosophy into how we're building things. But it's much more than that. I think as with any platform, you need to create an ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs to be curated and carefully remediated in order to bring solutions to life. Our view is that we can't build everything, nor do we want to. There's just too many problems out there to solve, and we can't solve every one of those things. What we want to be able to do is create a platform that connects the solutions that are out there, into the hands of our consumers or into the hands of our providers and other stakeholders. To do that, we think of healthcare as a giant integration problem. What do we want to integrate? How do we create that consumer experience, and how do we get it into the hands of our providers effectively? And how do we manage the data, responsibly, securely, with consumer, ownership of data and privacy, sort of at the core of every principle that we create. So to do that, then I think of it as Elevance as a digital platform for health, but also a platform for good, which is find the companies, the partners that share our values, which is create better experiences, improve health outcomes, essentially respect consumer data right, privacy, and have a mission-oriented sort of purpose to the company, which is what problems are we trying to solve? And of course, you want to do it profitably and reward investors and grow and all that good stuff. But at the core of it, it's healthcare. So we want to solve patient problems in a way that is very mission-driven. So we've created a number of partnerships with companies that have attempted to solve behavioral health problems to conditions like ALS, cancer, and given them a platform to say, here's Anthem's sort of incredible data assets. So we've created what we call a digital data sandbox, which is a anonymized sort of encrypted version of our data, which then our partners can use to test their algorithms, test integration, and as we develop proof points of things that are working, we can then systematically introduce them, through pilots, and then once the pilots work, scale them and integrate them into our broader ecosystem. So that's how we're thinking about it. There's a role to play for everyone. There's a role to play for Google. There's a role to play for, a startup that's, a two-person shop in the Valley, to, a company that in Israel might be, solving an advanced imaging problem. There's room for integrating all of those solutions. And that's the beauty of a platform business. But there's quite a bit of upfront sort of thinking and architecture that needs to happen to get it right, which took us a couple of tries to get right. But now we see the power of kind of platform economics and platform scaling principles coming into play.
The audience should know that's a gold standard answer in a growth mindset. And hyperscalers aren't transactional migration partners. That it is very strategic, very innovative. Gold standard, Rajeev. That was awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, Rich. Based on everything that we just heard from Rajeev, and as we think of mission, as we think of innovation, what are some of the key takeaways that you have as you've observed ecosystem formation across industries, and again, how that's helping enterprises in living, in innovating, and integrating, and so on.
I think, look, the ideal that Rajeev described is one that I think most companies should be moving towards, which is these strategic partnerships, recognizing common cause, right, and finding ways to take distributed set of assets that may not be on your books, but connecting those assets to do, create better outcomes for common customers, shareholders, et cetera. The pulling that off is exceptionally hard, and it takes lots of forethought in terms of the business architecture and the supporting technology architecture. I'd love to hear Rajeev talk about the probably years of modernization required to get to that starting point, because it's not insignificant. But again, the companies that are applying the forethought and see that end destination, they're doing the hard, unglamorous work now to create, an outcome where more innovation happens on a broader ecosystem. And that's what's going to create competitiveness, growth, and resiliency in the long run.
This, being a, healthcare-oriented discussion, and in light of, the headlines that we see every day around an algorithm, gone wrong, and, in the context of the ecosystems that we just talked about, Rajeev, I would love your insight into, how have you gone about building the integrity, the ethics, at the end of the day, the trustworthiness into this, puzzle that's very complex and that has many moving parts, all of which are alive on their own, to ensure that ultimately you're getting to, to the outcomes that, are part of that mission, right? And in this case is, to provide, a better system, and better outcomes for the constituents, of the healthcare system. And so we love your insight into, again, what it takes to build that at scale.
Frank, great point. And I think, this is something like all the topics you mentioned, right? So responsible use of AI, the ethics, transparency, making algorithms, not a black box, which is hard. You have to essentially think of it on day one. This is something that can be retrofitted into a transformation program, midway through a program. You almost have to invest a lot of upfront time thinking about, at scale, what do we need to have in place? It's almost counterintuitive because, when you have two algorithms running, in a small pilot, to think about a massive program around ethics, compliance, and transparency seems like it's a white elephant, or a foo-for-all for making a big deal out of nothing. But they think of it as like, well, if you didn't do that, and the 2 became 4 and 4 became 16, and 16 became 32, then all of a sudden you got to go back and think about, well, I jokingly say that the reverse of AI is IA, internal audit. How do you support the many questions, rightfully so, that people have about, well, tell me, why did you reach this decision? Or more importantly, an external a regulatory agency asking the same question. And how do you then create the documentation and the policies and all of that? You can't. So with considerable effort, we have to sort of make all of those investments up front, which is create a program around the responsible use of AI, around transparency, around sort of tools and capabilities to sort of make that happen at scale. It's not something that can just happen with people sitting together and documenting something about what's inside an algorithm. You have to have platform capabilities embedded into your software development toolkits, into your AI machine learning tools to make happen at scale. And think of it all these programs in the terms of when your company is a digital and AI first company and there's significant amount of automation happening and you're making decisions through algorithms, that every one of those things has to be transparent and auditable and traceable. And that's basically what we set up a large program around. And we adopted a mindset of, we've got to automate that. Of course, you have a lot of people tracking all those things down and feel good about it. But at the end of the day, unless it's built into your product development lifecycle and your software development lifecycle and your business model, change lifecycle, it's not going to get sort of embedded, right? So that was our goal, which is to make it a part and parcel of every single thing we do. And it's almost like every algorithm has a nutrition label, that you can look at and say, well, what does it do? Why does it reach decisions that it does? And then once live, you can have things like model drift and other things you have to worry about, right? So it's not just in development. In runtime, you have to make sure, it's an ongoing thing. So those are all the things that we have in place. I'd say that it's something that keeps me up at night. We continue to evolve it and think about like all the ways it could go wrong, and sort of proactively test for adverse scenarios just to make sure that we're on track.
Very good. Rich, I think Rajeev alluded to many let's call it many myths that the naysayers look to in order to not embrace change, right? Not embrace disruptive technologies. And so, since we're all about busting myths, what are some of the myths that as it relates to data, AI, or disruption, you believe that we can begin to bust, given our experiences, given what we're learning about the use of these technologies at scale?
Yeah, well, shameless plug for the book that I had come out 18 months ago, Transformation Myth. So the first myth is that this transformation is a one and done discrete event, and it really is a always on capability to respond to the external environment and make the company better. And increasingly, making the organization better requires bigger interconnected change. So myth one is don't plan on a finish line. And then the other really important one for me is this isn't any one function in the company's problem to solve. It's not the CIO's job. It's not the chief customer officer's job. Like the amount of codependence across the functions in a company to create the best products and services, the most interconnected supply chains, it requires so much of a team effort. And so, the silos really have to be broken in this model. And there's no one executive that's going to carry the torch more than another. And so, plan on a lot of codependence.
Well said.
Yeah, just to add to that, Fran, I think so sometimes when we talk about the technologies, right, artificial intelligence and blockchain and the metaverse and things that sound exciting, appealing, and sexy, but rarely is a transformation about the technology. It's mostly a cultural, I think, issue, which is the things that Rich just talked about, that there's no finish line. It's always a continuous kind of change process. It's a shift, right? Because we tend to think of things as projects, programs that have a start and a finish and a ROI, and you got to measure. Of course, you have to do all that, but it's really about think of it as what Netflix did, right? It started with shipping DVDs to your home, evolved to streaming, and now with the subscriber flux that they have, looking at advertising models. So it's a continuous sort of change of your business model. The technology just happens to be an enabler of that business model innovation. So culturally, if you adapt and sort of embrace that mindset, that's what you have to do, and then anchor it to your mission. Our mission happens to be improve the health of humanity and serve up a delightful consumer experience. So if you say that's our mission, and you got to just understand that a business model has to change, whether it's every 2 months or every 5 years, it doesn't matter. The technology has to be an enabler for that. That's really the crux of this, which unfortunately a lot of people tend to think about it. Well, I did this AI project or this blockchain project or this metaverse, which is really just more besides the point. The thing is, I think it's really well articulated in Rich's book, is the transformation is about the mindset.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, fascinating discussion. Our time flew by together, but my mouth is watering in anticipation of what's to come, the art of the possible, and look forward to continuing this discussion online and holding many of these forums. So with that, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank our panelists for, again, a very insightful discussion. And Rich or Rajeev, any closing comments?
Well, thanks for having me. It was a delightful conversation. Pleasure as always, Rich. Great book, and Fran, great to see you. And good luck with all of the efforts that Deloitte's doing in the industry.
Thank you. Rich, any closing comments?
Just thank you, Francisco, and Rajeev. Great to see you again. Thanks for the partnership and for being here today. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Thank you.